Well, they've been in the barn, but they've
Yeah.
been outside or anything.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they
Well,
haven't been exposed.
their mama Sassy was sassy. She was not a very friendly. She wasn't a friendly cat at all. So it's probably came from her because she was that way. She was not friendly at all.
Preacher said, couldn't you have done that before church?
And that old snake was her.
Preacher said, why not?
The coffee, I think it's coffee was coffee in her rest and her. Take coffee. Our neighbor's dog kills rattlesnakes in their backyard. He's their coldest dog. Terrible kisses, but he'll kill snakes. And it's the dachshund that does it. Dachshund does it. He's not scared of her. The Oscar.
All right, it is time for us to begin. You want to turn over in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 21. We are going to be studying Isaac and Rebecca at the same time, I guess you could say. We're going to be looking at this couple, and then we'll talk about Jacob and Esau and Joseph, and we'll finish that up for this quarter, looking at all these characters from the book of Genesis. It's been a blessing to be able to go through these men and women, to see the lives that they lived and the things that we can learn from them. We spent a lot of time in studying the character of Abraham, but I never felt like we, just drug it out or anything like that, because there is an enormous amount that's dedicated to him and his life. He was definitely the father of multitude of nations, but not just the physical aspect of that, but even into the spiritual aspect of him being our father. Our heritage comes from him as well. That promise that's given to him stretches over to us. Well, it continues on with his son Isaac. If you were to give Isaac a title, I wonder what you would give him. Would you say the son of a sacrifice? That the whole situation of him and his father going up on the mountain for Abraham to sacrifice him, maybe that's the first thing that pops in your mind. It might be more appropriate for us to call him the son of promise, in that Abraham waited years and years and even became frustrated and took matters into his own hands to be able to have this son of promise. But finally, Isaac is born, and that's really where we'll begin. His name, the name Isaac, means laughter. If we were to go back to Genesis 17, we could see where Abraham is told to name him Isaac because he laughed, and that Sarah laughed as well in Genesis 21, verse 6. His parents being Abraham and Sarah. His wife is Rebecca. He has two sons, Jacob and Esau, and Isaac lives to be 180 years old. I think that's, if I remember correctly, I think that is 5 years older than his dad lived. 5 years older than, 5 years older than Abraham. So he has a long life that he lives. And I was talking to some people this last week about this lesson, and they were saying, the Bible says that for children to obey their mother and their father, and that this is a commandment with a promise. Honor your father and mother. It's a commandment with a promise. You'll live a long life if you do so. And they say, well, maybe these people really took that to heart and lived that long of lives. Maybe so. I don't know if I would want to live that long. That's a long time. I've known people that get up to be, 95 and 100 years old, and they say, I'm ready. I'm tired of being here. I'm ready to go on. And that's understandable as well. Isaac lives 180 years. It's a long time. Well, let's start with his birth. Before we get to the death of Isaac, let's get to the birth of Isaac. Isaac is born in chapter 21. Whoop. Right through that. Let's see here. Make sure that's up there right. Yeah, there we go. So we've already mentioned Genesis 17 and also Genesis 18 and as well. But we're going to get into chapter 21. Let's read verses 1 through 12 to begin with. It says, Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Now remember, if you think back, God said to Abraham, you're going to have this child in this season next year, right down to the time. And so that's why when Moses records this, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him, he's referring back to that time that Moses said, this is exactly when you'll have that child. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son on the, let me get this spread out here a little bit better. Circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And is it not true that we look back and we see how ridiculous it is that she's that old when she's going to have a child? And so when she says, everybody's going to laugh about this whole situation. Here we are thousands of years later and we say, she's so old and she's having a baby. So ridiculous. Of course, everyone that hears of this birth in this old age, it's funny. It's ridiculous. But it's not impossible. And it's godly. Verse 7, and she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? That sounds ridiculous. Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Not only her old age, but Abraham is old too. Abraham's 10 years older than Sarah. So how old was Abraham? Verse 5 says that he's 100 years old when Isaac was born. So Sarah was 90 years old when Isaac was born. Verse 8 tells us that the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Now Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said to Abraham, drive this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because the lad and your maid, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants shall be named. All right, so we stop here for just a moment. And we see that this birth is miraculous. It's physically impossible for Sarah to have this child. She names him Isaac because of this reaction. And then Ishmael scoffs at him, mocks him. And it upsets Sarah. And so Abraham sends Ishmael away in accordance with the wishes of Sarah and the instructions of God. And so it's not just Sarah that feels this way when she voices what she wants that drives Abraham to do so, but also God says, do whatever Sarah asks you to do. I believe that that process demonstrates God's providence of how that division between Ishmael and Isaac would all pan out. And so I'm sure that according to what the scriptures tell us, that Abraham is distressed about this, that she would want Ishmael to leave. And maybe if it was just completely left up to Abraham, he would have said Ishmael to just stay right there. But instead, God intervenes and says, do whatever Sarah tells you to do. Listen to her. And he reminds him that the descendants of this promise are going to be through Isaac. Through Isaac, your descendants shall be named. I think that this is an interesting story here that just really shows how the providence of God falls into place. Verse 14 says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and the skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and he gave her the boy and sent her away, and she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. All right. All right, let's talk a little bit about the almost sacrifice of Isaac. Any questions, first of all, or comments about this situation with Isaac being born and then them sending Ishmael away? Anything at all that comes to your mind you want to share? Okay, well then let's talk about the almost sacrifice of Isaac. I named it almost sacrifice. Sometimes we just call it the sacrifice of Isaac, but it didn't happen. So I'm going to start, if that's okay with you guys, I'm going to start calling it the almost sacrifice. You know, it's just that close. I think it's worth noting. Instead of focusing on the idea that he was going to be killed, focus on the idea that he was almost killed. Here we find this story in chapter 22. Now we've read this past week when we were studying the story of Abraham, so I don't want to spend an enormous amount of time here. But I want to just point out a few things that I think are noteworthy for us. Isaac goes up and he accompanies Abraham to the land of Moriah. Notice that he doesn't realize that he's going to be sacrificed, or that he's almost going to be sacrificed. He doesn't even think and consider that this is going to happen. Let's read a little bit. It says, now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to Abraham, he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took his two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. We noted last week that they both go to worship. The men stay back, but Abraham says that we're going to go and worship, and we will return to you. We noted from Hebrews chapter 11 that Abraham knew. He believed in the resurrection, knew that God could raise him from the dead if he was to sacrifice his son, and understands that he would return to him. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. Now think about that just for a moment. What would your response be if you were Isaac? He took the fire in his hand and the knife. The two of them walk together. Think about what this is happening, what's going through Isaac's mind as they're walking towards this area. My father, he says, verse 7, here I am, my son, Abraham says. And he says, behold, the fire, the wood. We've got everything together for this sacrifice. Where's the lamb? And and Abraham says, God will provide for him the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two walked on together. They came to the place which God had told him. Abraham built the altar there, arranged the wood, and then bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. I wonder if Abraham had to chase Isaac around to get him to tie him up. I just think about that for just a moment. These are real people.
I think I would have had a heart attack and died before I
Your dad's taking you up on this mountain, and now he's going to tie you up.
That'd be one time, Alex, I would be glad to be blind.
You wouldn't see it coming, would you?
Exactly.
That's exactly right. You ever spank your child and they try to get away from you when they're spanking you, or when you're spanking them? You have to hold one arm, right? And then they're just going like this all the way around. I just wonder about this situation with Isaac.
I wonder if he told Sarah where he's going.
I know it. What's the... Yeah. Here's what's happening. Was she in on it? I don't know. But it's interesting to me to think about this, that these are real people. And that's the one thing that I think is important when we're reading these stories in the Old Testament, well, in the Bible, but in the Old Testament as we are this morning. It's important to realize these are real people with real emotions and real reactions, the same reactions that you might have in those situations. And so Isaac, I just imagine he's had to have been nervous about this. And finally, Abraham does grab him, I guess, and tie him up. And he puts him up on the altar to sacrifice him. That's impressive to me. And so he puts him up on top of the wood. Abraham stretches out his hand, this is verse 10, to take the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he says, here I am. I bet it didn't take long for him to say something. And he says, do not stretch out your hand against the lad. I think that's an interesting, stretch out your hand. Think about that for just a moment. The whole action of plunging a knife into somebody, stretching out your hand. Don't stretch out your hand against the lad. Do nothing to him. And now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. This is not just, God's testing Abraham, but I don't think the test is for God to find out anything. I think the test is to strengthen the faith of Abraham. Abraham is the one that benefits from this situation in growing in his faith towards God. That God will deliver. God will provide. God can take me to a place that I've never seen. God can put the very thing that I have longed for, the very thing that's been promised to me, on the altar to be sacrificed, and God will intervene. What a great lesson. Abraham knew it. He knew it from then on, for sure, that God is in control and God handles it. A good lesson for all of us. Are you willing to lay down what's the most precious thing to you and put it on the altar and give it to God? Maybe you need to be tested in the same way. Don't take Dylan to a mountain. Don't take your children to be sacrificed. But the idea is there. Are we willing to take the most precious things to us and lay it down there and say, God, you use it. You take it. However it pans out, I know that you're in control. John?
James, in chapter 2, uses this instance to explain how faith apart from works is dead.
Yeah.
It says that as the same as the body is dead without the spirit, so is faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And then it goes on and says, do you want to be shown that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's by what he had faith that God would take care of this situation.
Yeah.
And that's why I wasn't concerned about offering on the altar.
Yeah, he wasn't worried about doing the works because of his faith. And that's the point that James is making there. That's right. James makes the point that both faith and works work together and uses this illustration from Abraham's life to help us make that point.
It's actually completed by what you do.
Yes, that's right. Your faith is actually completed by what you do. I'm trying to repeat what you say so people over here can hear as well. But good stuff. Wonderful. Willingly laid on the altar that his father had built, waiting for his father's knife to plunge into him and kill him. Yes.
How old was Isaac?
I think 12, 13 years old, something like that. Young man. My son's 13, and he's stronger than he used to be.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
You know?
It wouldn't be easy.
No. It wouldn't be easy.
Especially for a 100-year-old.
Right.
Yeah, 100-year-old man. That's a good point.
But didn't they live like 600 years old back then?
Well, not at this point. Not at this point. Not anymore. Abraham is 100 years old. He's going to live another 75 years. So,
Ooh, 175.
so you might say he's middle-aged, though. You might say at 100.
Exactly. 113.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. 113. He's still got 60 years ahead of him,
You know, Alex,
Don't you think,
This-
I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead.
This shows the obedience of Isaac.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to make a comparison here in a little bit to Jesus, and I think that's a good point to bring out.
I was
Sharon?
thinking that, don't you think that Isaac saw a lot before this through Abraham and Sarah and their faith and just
Sure.
different things?
Yeah, the example that they had lived for those 12, 13 years of his life. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else? The almost sacrifice.
Figuring Abraham's mind, he was sacrificed.
Yes, that's right. Already done. All right. Let's talk about Isaac's marriage. The marriage of Isaac to Rebekah. Let's go over to chapter 24. 23 deals with the death and burial of Sarah. She's buried right there along with, or where she's going, where Abraham's going to be buried. He purchased a cave, the cave of Machpelah, and he buries her there. And that's where the whole family will be buried. But here we find chapter 24. This is where Isaac is going to get married. Abraham was old, is what Moses says, advanced in age. And the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. I love that passage. There's not anything that Abraham is lacking at this point. He's old. He has everything he'd ever need and more. He's blessed him in every way. Verse 2, Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live. But you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. All right, so let's stop for just a moment. Abraham takes his closest oldest, most trusted servant and says, I need you to swear, place your hand under my thigh and swear by the Lord that you're going to not take a wife from the Canaanites. Don't take these wives, but I want you to go to my relatives. If you remember, who is Abraham's wife? It's Sarah, I know that, but she's also his half-sister. And so while we look at that and say, oh, that's disgusting, I can't believe they would do this, it wasn't so completely ridiculous at this time. And they're keeping the bloodline pure. They're creating a people. They're making a nation is what they're doing. And so Abraham says, that's what needs to happen with my son. Go back to my relatives and find a wife for my son Isaac. He says, place your hand under my thigh. Isn't that odd? What do you think about that? Any ideas? What does that mean? Place your hand under my thigh.
I wondered that myself. That sounded kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to us. It's the same as if you were to, in our culture, what would we do? Maybe put your hand on the Bible, right? Or raise your hand to make an oath in court. Culturally, the Jews at this, and really starting with Abraham here, the tradition was that you would place your hand under the thigh, right here. Now, it's interesting because the idea is that you're placing your hand near the testicles of the one that you're swearing to because of where this oath is coming from. And what's interesting about that is that word for testicles is where we get the word testify as well. Isn't that interesting?
Never heard that.
Yes, it is.
And so they place this hand under the thigh to make an oath, because it's when you see this in the scriptures, this idea of placing your hand near the thigh, it's always in reference to family lineage. And we all know where family lineage comes from. And I just thought that was an interesting little piece that I found to study about, because I thought, what is this exactly? I've never seen this in the scriptures. It's the first time it's mentioned that this oath was made, and I think that it was worthy to research a little bit further. And I just thought that was interesting. To make an oath, to testify, to swear, and that's what he does. So he goes to his relatives to find a wife for Isaac. The servant said to him, suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you come? And Abraham said to him, beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give you this land, and he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning the matter. So the master says, let's just say I go there and this woman, this wife that I find, won't come back with me. Maybe I should take Isaac with me, and then maybe we could. And he says, don't take my son. Don't take my son back there. You go. God has given us this land. This is where we're going to stay. You go. An angel of the Lord will come before you and get this taken care of. And so the servant said, and he says, if it doesn't work out, then you'll be free from this. And so the servant makes the oath. Verse 10, the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master, set out a variety of good things of his master's hand, and he rose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. This is where Abraham is from. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham. This is a prayer at this point from the master, or from the servant. Lord God, the master of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will also water your camels. May she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. This is a beautiful prayer right here from this servant of Abraham. I just want you to think about this phrase. This is something that you could pray. Oh Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today. I bet you do pray that. I bet there's times in your life where something's about to happen and you think, Lord, let me be successful in this. Show your loving kindness in everything that's happening today. The servant goes on to say, I want to know for sure if this woman is the one that you have appointed to be the wife of my servant Isaac. And the way that I'll know this is if she says to me, not only can I drink if I ask her for a drink, but she's going to water my camels also. The one that says she will water my camels also, then I'll know for sure that that's the woman that has been appointed for this man Isaac. So he's praying this, and he sees. Notice he says, the women are coming out. They're walking right now towards us. They're coming to draw water, and he's praying this right then. He sees them. In my mind, I picture him crouching down behind some bushes and looking and watching, seeing these ladies walking up to draw water. But before he had finished speaking this prayer, verse 15, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. See, they're related. Came out with her jar on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled up her jar and came up, and the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your jar. And she says, drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they had finished drinking. That's what he's been waiting to hear. I just think it's amazing. Number one, he didn't have to go through a bunch of ladies before one of them said that. Rebekah, first one in line. That's how God does things, see. That's how God, if he's going to do it, he's going to do it fully. Here he provides this woman. It's the first one. Now, it's not always that God provides the answer just like that. There are times that we do wait. But in this instance, in this time, with this example, God provides Rebekah immediately to the master. And so she draws water. She quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to draw from the well, and she drew for his camels. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence. He's just to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrists, weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? And she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Again, she said to him, we have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in. Then the man bowed low and worshiped the Lord and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. The word loving kindness is found several times right here. And it's just, your Bible may actually translate it goodness. Does anybody have just goodness right there? Nobody? Kindness. It's loving kindness. It's goodness. It's goodness and kindness. That's why it's called loving kindness, I guess. But it's just an interesting key word that's found in the passage. I think it's worth noting. So the girl runs back. She gives him water. She gives him lodging. And then he's met. Goes back to, and he meets the rest of the family, right? Goes back to her mother's household and says all these things to her. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. When he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he had heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. And he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house, a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house, and Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels, and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." I need to tell you this whole story. And he said, "Well, speak on." And he says, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master. He's become so rich. He's got flocks, he's got herds, he's got silver, he's got gold. He's got servants and maids and camels and donkeys. Sarah, my master's wife, has a son. She had this son in her old age. And he has given him all that he has. And my master made me swear not to take a wife of the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but go to my father's house, to my relatives, to take a wife for my son." And he tells him the whole situation that we've already read. And he says, "I come to this spring." Verse 42. "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, now if you will make my journey on which I go successful." And then he tells the whole story about meeting Rebekah. Rebekah comes out. He tells the whole story all over again. Verse 49. Let's skip down there. He says, "Now if you're going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know that I may turn to the right hand or to the left." In other words, if it's not going to be this way straight on, that's fine. Let me know. I'm going to go either way. I'm going to go somewhere else. Laban and Bethuel replied, "The matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good or bad or good. Here's Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your son's master, as the Lord has spoken." That's an important piece of it. When Abraham's servant heard these words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. Verse 58, they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" That's what the family says. "Okay, now here's the situation. Will you go with him?" And she says, "I will go." Thus they sent her away, their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them." Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac had come from going to Beer Laharoi, for he was living in the Negev. That's the southern region. Isaac went out to immediately in the field toward evening, and lifting up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" Woo! And the servant said, He's my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that had been done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. What an interesting story here. Beautiful story where Isaac and Rebekah, at love at first sight, become married. Isn't it interesting that he's comforted by his mother's by his wife after his mother's death? An interesting place to stop for just a moment and really end maybe for today. That Isaac can become comforted in his marriage by his wife. I think that's an important piece of it. And something, when Kira and I have done some marriage workshops or marriage counseling with people, I think that's a key part right there, because your wife, your spouse can help you get through some of the most difficult times. And that's exactly what we find right here. He had lost his mother, and he's comforted after that wedding to his wife. Just an interesting piece. Okay, we'll pick up next week. We're going to start in chapter 25, about verse 19 or so, and talk about Isaac's sons, the two nations, Jacob and Esau, and then we'll make some comparisons between Isaac and Christ. That leads us right into that next lesson of Jacob and Esau, and talking about these two nations that were formed from those two brothers. All right, thank you very much for your attention this morning.
Uh-oh.